Greetings, family, friends, and survivors. I'm starting to get this room cleaned up and get it ready for starting seeds. A little early yet. I wanted to talk to you about solar and safety. Now, I am not a professional installer, and my videos are not instructional videos. My video channel is Shared Life in the Pacific Northwest. The only thing I'm doing different now than I've done in the last 30 years is that I am off-grid with solar. I've been off-grid with generators before, and now we're off-grid with solar. So that's kind of a new experience. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about safety. There's a misnomer out there that, well, because it's solar and it's DC, that there's no shock hazard. That's simply not true. Now, what you're looking at is a PWM charge controller. And you'll notice with PWM charge controllers that the voltage coming in from the solar array is very close to the voltage of the battery system. You'll note that I'm at 30.3 volts now. It's doing its absorb cycle. But this is a 24 volt system, 24 volts nominal. So it's open circuit voltage. In other words, if I took all of the load off this charge controller and measured it in full sunlight, it'd be about 36 volts DC. And people get the idea that because it's low volt, it's safe. Well, it is safe to a degree, these low volt systems, as far as shock is concerned, although you can get shocked if your hands are wet enough. There is a huge risk of fire. So let me start there with fire. This charge controller is rated at 60 amps. And I have a 50 amp array. So if I was at 30 degrees outside, I was at solar noon about March, where my panels are actually pointed straight at the sun at that height, I'd have about 50 amps. So I've got a 60 amp charge controller. And the reason why you do that, the reason why I do that, is so when there's an edge of cloud event, this charge controller with the array that I have, though 50 amps is normal, can be 75 amps for a couple of minutes from edge of cloud syndrome. So that means I need to have the wiring and the charge controller that I've chosen capable of handling that. Now, smarter charge controllers have the ability to derate the power. Most of them, from my reading, are able to handle 120% of rated power for a few minutes. Charge controllers, the MPPT, a lot of them have it where you can literally limit the power going in or out of them. The PWM, that's not true on all of them. So if you've got, say you get a cheap Chinese charge controller for 20 bucks on eBay and it's a 30 amp and you've got it maxed out, and then you have a edge of cloud event, either your charge controller is going to burn up or you will get wiring dangerously hot unless you have it fused appropriately. So having the right fuse to protect not only the wiring but to protect the charge controller itself is advisable unless you want a fire. Now, a lot of folks say, well, it's only 12 volts, there's no shock potential. Well, it's hard to get shocked with 12 volts DC. That's true. But there's a huge fire potential. So with the MPPT low volt, if a person wants to build a shed out in their garden and hook some batteries and some solar panels to it and a fuse, there's not a whole lot of danger there other than fire if it's done incorrectly at a 12 volt system. But once you hook an inverter to it, now you've got 120 volts AC. That'll kill you dead instantly kill you. So it's not necessarily safe just because it's a 12 volt system. there's a lot of innate dangers with it. So having the right charge controller, the right size wire, the right fusing, the right breakers, etc. I see so many systems that have AC household type breakers running with DC running through them, and they're just not rated for DC. As far as I know, Square D QO is the only one that's rated for DC, but if you're up to 48 volt system, you've got to break both sides or put them in series. Well, this is a 24 volt system, and this is rated breaking just one leg with this particular brand from my reading. But don't take my word for it. You need to check it out yourself. And then of course everything needs to be NEC, National Electrical Code, county code, state codes. You need to make sure it's safe. So you have to have some understanding of the code book if you're going to do these things yourself. And if there's any doubt at all, install what you can, but before you put power to anything, have somebody that knows what they're doing, a professional solar installer or an electrician that's familiar with photovoltaic systems. So a lot of folks start out with a 12 volt system and they play around with it and they learn, and that's great. That's kind of what I did. But I want you to understand that just because it's a 12 volt system doesn't mean that there's no risk. And I see people that put 12 volt systems with MPPT charge controllers in their house with no fusing, and they run wires all over their house, both in 12 volt and through an inverter. And none of it's grounded, none of it's connected to a ground rod, and there is a major fire potential there. So if you don't understand about proper wire sizing and ampacities, you can download ampacity charts. I've been using ampacity charts since 1979. It'll tell you right there what kind of wire, how many in a conduit, how many amps you can put through it at what voltage. So that stuff's available. One thing you don't want to do is just wing it. Don't just start hooking stuff up and expect to not have a fire at some point. The learning curve can get pretty steep. Now, if it's out in a solar shed or a garden shed out away from the house, nobody lives in it, and you want to do it that way so you can learn, that's up to you. But if you're going to put it anywhere near where people sleep, you really need to make sure that you understand it and that you're following the NEC, National Electrical Code. As an electrician for many years, I firmly believe in the NEC. I really do. I have never done anything professionally that was substandard code-wise. I've done a few things in my own home that were safe, but weren't exactly kosher, if you know what I mean. But it was safe. But before the home was ever sold, those things were corrected. So that's my opinion on these things. Once you get to MPPT, things change. The difference is, on a PWM, the solar input voltage is pretty close to the nominal voltage of the system. As you could see, 29.9, and it's a 24 volt system. Not a whole lot of difference. What MPPT is able to do is you can put your panels in series and it raises the voltage. You see, this one's 128 volts. And it's resting right now, and it's not putting anything out because the batteries are full, but that's 128 volts DC, and that'll kill you dead. There is a difference between DC. AC crosses the zero plane with the sine wave and then back up again, and every time it crosses that zero plane, when you're getting shocked, it'll make you let go. Not true with DC. DC interacts with your skeletal muscle system, and you just grit things even harder, and you can't let go. You're just wanting to let go, and you can't. That's what DC does. And so there's no little shock involved when you're dealing with DC at these voltages. That will kill you. That also will sustain a huge arc. For instance, as a welder, most welders are in the 30 to 35 volt range. Stick welders are a little bit more wire welders are a little bit less, but they're all in that range. And 128 amps at 29 volts will weld 7018 1/8-inch thick rod and join 1/4-inch plate mild steel to 100% penetration. Folks, that's a commercial weld right there. That's the current that you're looking at. And I try to use welders to get people to understand its potential for fire. And if you were to reverse these things, take this 29.8 and put it over here for volts and put the 128 amps over here, you'd be seeing the same potential for fire. But as they are now, the potential for shock is huge. So you've got with MPPT a huge risk for electrical shock and fire if it's not fused correctly or terminated correctly where you make your connections, because DC loves to sustain an arc. That's why DC arc welders are the best. A cracker box AC welder is spitting and sputtering and throwing dingleberries everywhere and doesn't want to maintain the arc. But you get a DC stick welder, weld smooth, wants to maintain the arc, doesn't want to give it up. You can take your welding rod, start an arc, and lift it up off of the work, and you see it continue to throw flame 3 inches, 4 inches away. Well, I'm telling you folks, just because it's solar does not mean it's safe. So I'm trying to give you just enough information here to encourage you to do some research and ask yourself, do I have the skill necessary to do this without burning the house down or shocking myself or shocking somebody that comes in behind me? That's a really good question. And right now I'm showing you the one system that is not in conduit, but you'll note it is the lower voltage system. So the shock potential is down, but its fire potential is still very high, and that's why it's fused correctly, both coming in and going out. Everything that's involved with the higher voltage stuff is all in conduit, and it's all code, and I'll show you why. Having a separate shed is a great advantage. It doesn't have all of the potential for gas fumes and that sort of thing, and if there is a fire, it's out here. And this has 130 amp AC circuit that goes to a generator switch on the house. So that was pretty safe, even with its lower 1400 watt, 24 volt system. That's safe, protected with fusing at both ends, all in the right wire size, etc. But when you start putting solar panels on the roof of a structure, and that has a bedroom in it, and all my wood storage and my cars are in there, my wife's beauty salon. So when something goes up on the roof, you notice everything's in conduit, it's in the right junction boxes, it's all the right wire size, right kind of wire, etc. You just don't take any chances. MPPT, higher voltage, that's no joke, and you want to make sure you get it right. So that's probably got some folks upset. But I want everybody to be safe and not take unnecessary risks. Another thing that I see is people put wire right into a knockout, and it's a sharp edge, and that wire expands and contracts. When amperage goes through it, it expands because it warms up, and when it cools off, it contracts. And that working back and forth on that sharp metal edge, eventually, if not now, 10 years from now, eventually it will short out. And then, if it wasn't fused properly, you have a major fire on your hands. When you're talking about the battery bank, the amperage that it's capable of is amazing. I could weld for many, many hours off these batteries, just to give you an idea of its fire potential. So if you're experimenting and you've got a shed and you're learning about it, don't cut corners. Even if it's in a shed and it's not connected to the house, use fuses, the right kind of fuses. AC fuses will not work on a DC system. They need to be DC rated fuses. and the breakers need to be DC breakers in the right application. And I got to thinking about people seeing my solar system, and if you're set out to copy what I've done without understanding the ins and outs of the system and where the potential fire hazards and shock potentials are, you need to ask somebody who knows what they're talking about. And I'm concerned because I see a lot of advice that's being given on YouTube, and really it doesn't matter whether it's good advice or bad advice. Can you even understand the advice that you're being given? So it really will pay off in the end to do your homework and study. I say if you've probably wired a house before, if you can wrap your brain around 21 different ways to wire a three-way switch, if that makes sense to you, you're probably going to be able to handle it. If you don't even know what a three-way switch is, you're not ready to start this. So I'm not trying to be offensive to anyone. I just don't want anyone to get hurt. And let me tell you a story. Sometimes stories are good. This is getting a little long, but sometimes the story's good. I had a good friend of mine who taught me high voltage motor control. Now, the systems that we were working on were 2,300 horsepower. That's right, 2,300 horsepower. They're giant GC motors. It was 4160 volts, three-phase. And they were four-stage Ingersoll and Rand air compressors. There was 6 of them, 4160 volts. And so with that kind of wire, you're using XLP wire, you're using stress cones that pull the aurora off of the outer insulation and taking it to ground so aurora doesn't build up. There's a lot of things to high voltage stuff. And understanding stress cones is really important. Understanding switch gears and what to switch and what not to switch in any given system is pretty important. Well, I had a friend that actually built the system with me. He was the brains, I was the lead electrician, and I had a crew. He's the one that told me about how to remove the capacitance on the uphill feeders. And what we had was power stations, about 15 power stations that were all 480 on the low side, and they were 4160 on the high side, and they were all 15 and 20 kVA transformers, a couple of 50s up there. And those transformers by nature will hold capacitance. In other words, even though your switch is off and you've disconnected the power from that uphill feeder, the transformer is able to contain enough capacitance, it's acting like a capacitor. So what we would do is we would take a fiberglass pole, a 10-foot fiberglass pole, and a big ground clamp on a cable, and we hook it to a good ground source, and the end of the pole had a contactor, and we'd touch it to each bus, and we'd drain the capacitance on every single bus anytime we were working inside a switchgear. And a friend of mine taught me how to do this, and he was the best of the best with honors, sir. He taught me how to do it. Well, after I left, 2 or 3 years later, after I resigned from that position, I found out that my friend had gotten in a really bad accident and burned himself. He had gone to a switchgear that I know very, very well, 3-phase switchgear. It had 369, had 9 sets of 650 MCM wire. That's a lot of copper, not to mention the 3/8 by 4 buses in the back of the switchgear. Well, he was late at night, the power went down, he's trying to get the generators going and switch everything over on the big Magna Blast to get the power uphill to 1.6 megawatt generators, Cat V12s. And all that's running fine, and he's ready to drop the capacitance on this before he switches over. So he grabs that fiberglass pole that I've used so many times, and it goes to ground the resistance out, or excuse me, the capacitance off those feeders. And what he forgot was the potentiometer, the PT transformers. That circuit was still on. It's a 5 amp circuit, but folks, 5 amps at 4160 is pretty scary stuff. So he got burned really bad. And if you can picture 650 MCM wire and those buses, what we're talking about is about 150 pounds of copper. That loom, when he touched it, turned to gas in 1/100th of a second. And when copper vaporizes, there's a big explosion. And the guy that taught me and warned me over and over how to do it right, late at night, forgetting the PT transformer switch, he ends up getting burned really bad. One of the best electricians I know. So I'm telling you, accidents can happen, and knowing what you're doing is important. And if you don't know, just because it's solar and it's low voltage, you can't get away with unlimited experimentation without a steep learning curve. You need to know what you're doing. There's lots of books that can teach you. You can take a college course. You can maybe go volunteer to work with another solar installer and say, hey, I'm going to be putting in my own system, and can I work for you and be your grunt for a while? And he can show you some stuff. Do something to be safe. Just because it's solar doesn't mean you can't get shocked and you can't burn your house down. That's important. That's really important. So I've seen a few videos. Nobody in our circle, all the people that we talk to, there's lots of great channels that we watch. Chris Dyer is one of my favorite. Awesome guy, knows what he's doing. Roy Amberg, he's another one. He knows what he's doing. There's a couple of others that I watch, and they know way more than I do, and I learn a lot from these guys. But I've also seen some that are horrifying, and I know that they're so close to burning their houses down. And how do you contact them and say, stop everything you're doing, disconnect everything, and here, let me send you some fuses and a charge controller? It's come down to that with some of these videos that I've seen, and monumentally bad advice that's given. And so there's folks out there right now saying, hey, this is easy, you can do it, anybody can do it, you can buy the stuff. Look, it's not plug and play. They make some nice plug and play power wall, quote unquote, stuff that's relatively easy, and I'll show you one of them. This unit right here with this inverter and this mini breaker panel and this charge controller was all of a piece, and it was sold like that. You hang it on the wall and you stick your solar in one end and run the other end to your batteries, and you're done. But what about the other end? What about the battery side? What about the solar side with your combiner boxes? How about hooking the stuff up in here right? Well, even when you get a pre-assembled system like this, there's more to it than just what people would call plug and play. So I just watched a video that says, you can do this. This is easy. To me, it's easy because I've been an electrician since 1978, and I have a lot of experience doing it. Maybe it's not easy for everybody. You know what I'm saying? I have a friend that walked me through how to rebuild an injector pump on a tractor. He's done hundreds of them. So I said, tell me what to do. And he told me all of the things to watch out for. And he says, you've got one temptation. When you slide this thing together, if you let it over travel, it will cut the O-ring and you'll have to start over. And I went, really? He says, don't take a shortcut at this process. And I listened to him, and I was able to put it together successfully. So when it's over your head, get some information. And I don't mean just watch more YouTube videos. Don't refer to my system on how to do it, because my channel is not a how-to system. In fact, I think I wrote the encyclopedia on how to do things wrong, and I learned what was right by default. Maybe that's why my body's so torn up. I'm telling you, folks, you got to do it right. There's loved ones around you, and it's important to make sure that it's right. So I'm an advocate of NEC, National Electrical Code. I'm an advocate of those safety standards. So there you have it. I hope you don't unsubscribe me for my opinions, but really my heart is to make sure that nobody gets shocked and nobody burns their house down. Maybe you do know what you're doing and this is easy for you, and good on you. You're not the one I'm talking about. There's other folks out there that, well, I can just tell they're over their head. So anyway, be safe. I love you guys. Thanks for watching. Really long-winded. If you made it this far, wow, that's amazing. That's why I say welcome, family. Greetings, family, friends, and survivors. And what I mean about survivors is those that have survived my goofiness for several years now. Thanks. Have a blessed night.